Hi, welcome to another installment of Ruth Presents on Disc Jockey News TV. I'm so excited to be interviewing one of my very special friends, and he's actually my mentor with the National Speakers Association. He's the chapter president of the Kansas City chapter of the National Speakers Association, and his name is Steve Iwersen. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Steve, because Steve's got a huge bio, so I'm going to have to refer to my notes because there's so much to tell. He's known, Steve Iwersen's influence as a speaker and writer in the field of leadership has been far-reaching. His ideas and approach to creating a leadership culture and navigating leadership challenges have helped leaders within corporations, associations, government, and even the military. He is the founder and owner of Aurora Point, a leadership development and training company. And he's also the author of, get ready to write these down because there's a ton of books. He is the author of the Porcupine Principles Personality. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be with you, Ron.
Did I cover your entire life in your intro there?
Pretty close.
I got it all. Was there anything I missed? I mean,
you know, they say that your life flashes right before you, just moments before. No,
an interview.
An interview is right.
Just moments before an interview, my life just flashed before me.
Yes.
So I want to start with in your afterword. We're going to talk about this book. In your afterword, you say Pamplona, Spain has the running of the bulls. France has the Tour de France. Indianapolis has the Indy 500, and Council, Idaho hosts the world champion Porcupine Races. And I'm guessing that this is the basis of what's called the Porcupine Principle. But let's start with the basics. I want to know, tell me about the World Championship Porcupine Races. What is that all about?
What, you haven't heard of it before? I thought it was a world-renowned event, really.
I must be living under a rock because I've somehow missed it. Unless they do it at Disney World, I don't see it. So,
oh well, maybe we could arrange a Disney style.
There you go.
Race. Yeah, that's right. Well, Council, Idaho is a little tiny town tucked up in the mountains of Idaho, about maybe 2 hour drive north of Boise, Idaho.
Right.
And it used to be years, and the other two said, sure, why not? Because there's plenty of porcupines all over in the mountains of Idaho, and that was the impetus of this crazy idea. And now 40 plus years later, every 4th of July, they host the World Championship Porcupine Races.
But okay, all right. First off, I love the fact that two other guys went, why not? But my bigger question is about porcupines. I mean, don't these things aren't they dangerous, or don't they have these real stickly, pointy quills on them that can
They sure do
shoot out at you and put your eye out?
Well, I'm not sure they put your eye out, but if you make contact with them, you're going to get hurt. You sure will. The porcupines, and I'm not a porcupine expert, but I've had to learn some things about them in order to teach what I teach. Porcupines are the largest of the rodent family in North America.
Right.
And they do have quills. The quills have a sharp barb at the end of every one, kind of like a fish hook.
Right.
If it punctures your flesh, it's going to stick and it's going to stay. And at that point, it pulls away from the porcupine. And while the predator is dealing with its pain, the porcupine gets to wander off.
Right.
Yeah. Now, at the races, what's interesting is that your goal is to get your porcupine to the finish line before anybody else can. Your problem is not the quills. Your problem is a porcupine leader of some kind. Here's our goal. Let's make it happen. They're going to usually just sit there and look at you. As soon as the race begins, they lift those cans up. And at that moment, you've got to try to figure out how to get that porcupine to move in the direction that you know. Other element that you prefer, I think maybe we'll cover a little bit on the conversation, right. And that's
I don't want it spoiler alerts here. Well,
yeah, but we'll give a little bit of away. There is a fence. Now, when I was a little boy, people ask me, how did you ever discover the porcupine races? I was a little boy, and my dad was the pastor of the church in this little mountain town. And when I was small, that was the beginning, a little bit more dependable. So they put up a fence, and that can become a good tool for you as well.
Okay, I want to get into the book. We're going to get into the book here in a minute, but I got at least a couple more questions on this whole porcupine race thing, because now I'm fascinated. So, okay, so do they have like farms where they raise these porcupines, be racers,
No.
and you go to the farm and you pick out one and you race it? Where do these porcupines come from?
Most of the porcupines are caught somewhere in the region. They're either caught in the forest, along the old logging roads. Oftentimes they find them in the farmers' fields, or maybe in the hay, in the barns. You never know where you're going to find them. They are nocturnal, and so the teams that want to race, they have to catch their own. So they're wild. They usually catch them at night. And for those of you who are thinking, well, this doesn't seem too fair for the porcupine, the competitors have to participate in a class that's taught by the wildlife department. There's some very strict rules on how the animals are to be treated, and they are typically caught 24 to 48 hours before the race. It's my understanding now that wherever that porcupine is found, you have to GPS that location, because when the race is over, you have to return the porcupine exactly to where you found it that afternoon. And every animal is examined by a veterinarian before the race begins. And if there's any indication of an injury, if the porcupine is pregnant, don't ask me how they figure that out. I don't know how. But if it is, they don't race those porcupines.
That's just fascinating to me. I mean, well, at least, and I would imagine the porcupines are really well taken care of while in a handler's care. I mean, they probably get fed only the best, whatever it is,
yes.
Porcupine food. I mean, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, for a number of years in my leadership experiences, and I'm sure none of your viewers and listeners have ever had these problems, but I discovered there were some grumpy, uncooperative, reluctant people that I would have to find ways to lead and to engage in some way. Some of them were very obstinate, and others just not comfortable with change. And so I learned through experience different methodology that worked for my personality and style. None of which really came from the Porcupine Races. It was just stuff that I needed to do. When I started the leadership development company, I was doing leadership training, typically 1 and 2 day training programs. And a part of that would always be, how do you handle conflict? We had a specific curriculum that we had to use while we were going through those programs, specifically when we did programs for military and government. They had very strict curriculum we had to work through. And to be quite honest, it was boring. Content was okay, but it was just boring. And I noticed after a number of months of teaching these courses that every time we get to this particular section, even though people wanted to figure out how to deal with conflict, the curriculum itself they just disconnected from it. And one day, out of desperation, not just for the participants, but for myself, because I was bored too, I had this crazy memory of the Porcupine Races, and I said, this point right here in the curriculum kind of reminds me of a time when I saw the Porcupine Races. And everybody in the room went, what? And they leaned in and they're going, what's a porcupine race? And so I started to talk about how the races occurred and how I thought that this concept and this method of persuasion was very similar to the way they tried to persuade porcupines to cooperate to reach a goal that they didn't really want to reach in the first place. And everybody in the room lit up. And one guy said, oh man, I've got a prickly person on my team. And that was, for me, the light bulb. Everybody's got a prickly person. And so I went back and I just started to look at my memories. I started taking notes. I found photos. I started to think through, well, could I begin to teach this using the metaphor of the races a little bit more entertaining, but also memorable with some key ideas? And that was really the beginning of the teaching. And after about 5 or 6 years of teaching that, and actually becoming known for that particular program, I decided it was time to write the book. And therefore, the Porcupine Principles became kind of the core of everything we teach, and I teach 5 specific principles about leadership using the story and the experience of the races.
What I found fascinating about your book, and yes, I did read it. What I found fascinating about your book was that it doesn't just apply to people with coworkers or with people, employees, I guess, or staff members. In my opinion, it applies to persuasion in just about everything anybody does, whether it be in sales consultations or whether it be in planning meetings or whether it has to do with a family. It's all about persuasion. Yes. And I know that the four examples that you use in the book of the different personalities that can sometimes be prickly people are the pessimist, where nothing, the bipolar, or literally is ever right. Never would be, but more literally would probably be passive aggressive. This is a person that in front of you is going, Steve, you are the most amazing employer I have ever met. I got to tell you, I hope I retire with this company. But the minute they walk out the door, they're telling others how you not so much either.
Right.
And then there's the constant complainer. This is an individual that doesn't just complain for the sake of complaining. This is usually an individual that lacks confidence and maybe even social skills. And I think we all have run into people like that.
Yeah.
One of the things you talk about in your book that I really liked was how all of this starts with an understanding that most people, their basic needs are respect, feeling value, and having some autonomy. So let's talk about that, how that relates to the Porcupine Races. One of the very, very first principles you talk about is the broom. Talk a little bit more about how the broom is used in relationship to the Porcupine Races and how that applies to helping with not control these individuals, but being able to better communicate with these individuals.
Okay.
That would be a better choice of words.
Yeah. Well, maybe it would be good for me to just give this disclaimer or this strong advice.
Okay.
I am not in any way advocating that you begin to chase people around with a broom and a trash can. Even though it might be tempting to do so.
Well, now I got to change the headline
just
of the video.
Of the metaphor. Yeah, I'm sorry. But the idea of the broom, if we think about the race,
okay,
during the race, when the race begins, the champions that tend to be more consistently successful,
right,
have a methodology, strategy of how to use the broom. And the broom,
right,
we might think is to protect yourself from getting stuck, but what they see is it's a tool to persuade.
Right.
And what they do is if the porcupine begins to move maybe a little too far to the left or the right, they will put the broom in front of its nose. And all of a sudden it realizes there's something in its way. And then it will begin to make an adjustment. It will shift. They're not allowed to push, poke, or prod.
Right. They can't touch the porcupine. Right.
They can persuade it. Right.
Right.
And so watching that, I began to realize that's the tool that represents our need to be a little bit more engaging and help people have better information. It's not just a leadership thing. It applies to sales. It
right.
applies to teamwork, like you said. It can even work within family context. And here's the principle that I wrote in regards to the broom. The broom's about guidance, which is really persuasion. And the principle itself is that the best decisions come from timely, meaningful information,
right,
and a clarity of direction. Now, the key words out of that principle for me is decisions and timely, meaningful information. The reason that decisions is a key word is because it's a decision that the other person is needing to make.
Right.
Now, the races, they inform the porcupine, not an option, not going to go this direction, and it makes its own decision. It makes an adjustment on its own, preferably where you want it to go. If it goes too far, then broom comes over here, and you inform it, and now you can guide it.
Right.
And I think if we see people as people that need to be respected, and we value them. And that key word of autonomy, a basic need, that people have a need to control their own engagement, their own process. And none of us like to be controlled. And if we do, we get prickly. But if we have a lot of salespeople, they're so focused on reaching the goal that they're not paying attention and they're not listening to the fact that some people are just needing more info.
Right.
And they need information that's relevant to their need. And if we would really pay attention to that, then we could then respond more appropriately. And as people gain that information, the more information they gain, the better qualified they are to move forward.
Right. And I think a couple lessons that might apply to the people that are watching the video. One is that, in our industry, in the wedding and event industry, we're often dealing with people that don't work for us. They represent another segment of the industry, like a wedding planner and a DJ as an example. And oftentimes there may be a miscommunication between the wedding planner and the DJ, but it's not a matter of whether the wedding planner is not willing to bend, but it's maybe a matter of they just need more information of why it is, as a DJ, I need to be able to perform this particular function of my job. Without that information, then yeah, they just think that they may think that all you're trying to do is take control. Whereas this is a situation where we can actually help each other here. Let me explain how we can help each other here, and how we can not only help each other, but how we can be, we can have even a better results for this particular event. Another example, and you use it in your book, which, by the way, this one really stood out to me. You talk about how picture a sales rep that walks into your office and they want you to buy a $20,000 copier, and they just, and they hand you a contract. Here, this is a $20,000 copier. It's going to do a better job. Here's a contract. Sign it. Would you sign it? Chances are no. And why? It's because there's not been any information here that persuades you, that tells you really need to have this. Yes, it may be better, but what else? I mean, what does it do? And a lot of times in a sales consultation, I think sales reps have a tendency to want to talk about the what, but very few want to talk about the why. Why is this important to you? How is this going to be a benefit to you? And if you can get people to understand that, if you can persuade people to understand the why, they're going to be more inclined to sign on the bottom line. Am I reading this right? I
think so, yeah. And let me add a little to that as well.
Okay.
Oftentimes what I hear salespeople do is they talk about the what it will do.
Right.
And what they want to accomplish, but what they haven't done is taken time to find out what is the need and desire of the potential customer. And if we can figure out what is it that's important to them, then tie that to the why this is a potential answer or a process that works for you, and you're going to get this kind of result. And the thing, go back to working with that meeting planner. You're a team. You're partners. It's like being in the Porcupine Races. There's two human beings and one prickly partner, and together they've got to work. And but sometimes they don't get your language because they only think in terms of their checklist, and you're looking at not just the checklist but the big picture of other pieces that need to happen. So finding a way to really communicate and having that better information should be a win-win.
And it's information that should be just like probably with the Porcupine Races. There's got to be some discussion of strategy before you ever show up at the races. It doesn't just happen when you get on the starting line. There has to be some conversation between the two people about how are we going to make this work? How are we going to be the champions today?
That's right.
And a lot of times in my industry, in the wedding and event industry, a lot of times these conversations don't take place until the actual event, and by that time,
some of the contestants. And there was one team that the interviewer asked, "So what's your strategy?" And these two young guys looked at each other and kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, "Let it go and see what happens."
Did they win?
And no, they ended up running in circles at the starting line and never really got anywhere down the field. And the other team that actually placed it, and was I'm not sure that they won. They were really close to winning, but they responded by saying, "Oh yes, we've talked about who's doing what and what we hope will happen." Right. Of course, you never know because it's a porcupine, but we've got a plan, and it's our secret. We're not going to tell anybody.
Right. Yeah.
But because they had planned in advance, they were better prepared.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an expression about something about planning the work. But yes, if you plan ahead, then things are going to be more likely to go in the way you want them to go. So let's,
to contain my own drive and passion to accomplish the goal on the timeline that I have in mind. And when others kind of drag their feet, or they misunderstand, or whatever the issues may be, I can get impatient and I can push forward, when in reality, maybe I'm needing to slow down, take a little time to be a little more courteous, keeping in mind the principle of respect, and giving them opportunity to really think through how they can be successful in that. And so the containment is, it really is, it comes down to thoughtful conversations. So I really do believe thoughtful conversations will lead to much greater possibility and potential. And if we aren't thoughtful, what we end up having is thoughtless confrontations, which do no good at all.
So how does a trash can, though, apply to, and I want to get more into what you were just talking about, but how does it apply to the races? So they put the porcupine in a trash can.
Yes.
And I'm assuming, is it a kind of trash can that has a lid on it, or is it just in the bottom of a
It's just it's an open can. So probably a 50-gallon trash can, like a big Rubbermaid kind of can or something like that.
So they flip it over, so it's upside down, and the porcupine, of course, is inside of this trash can. Is the trash can just simply for the purpose of ready, set, go?
No, there's more to it. I interviewed two young men a few years ago who have won 6 times over the course of 9 years. I noticed they had some techniques that nobody else did, and I'm thinking 6 times out of 9 is a pretty good success rate. So I asked them about the trash can, and they said, "Well, Stephen, oftentimes most people just use the trash can as a way to protect themselves from getting stuck."
Right.
And it's a defense thing.
Right.
They use it offensively. Their intention is to, what they do is they lay the can down on its side right behind the porcupine, so that if in the middle of the race it decides, I don't want to go this way, and it turns around, tries to retreat, it discovers that's not an option. There's this visual, it's like, oh, okay. It's almost like a mobile boundary in a sense. And some teams will use it, they pound it on the ground to try to create some sound, maybe thinking that will move it forward. I don't believe that's necessarily the best thing. I don't think it really works. But what they told me was that when they put the broom and the trash can together, and whatever the porcupine does, each one is prepared to do what they need to do to keep things moving.
And not containment in the sense of you want to try to separate somebody from something. The containment is you want to give people an opportunity to think about things before.
Right.
In other words, if I'm offering you an idea, I want to give you an opportunity to consider that idea, so that you don't feel pressed to follow through at that moment, especially if it's something that you're not really excited about. Especially if it's in a workplace, it may be a change in a policy or procedure that's going to change everything in the way you've ever done anything before. And it gives you an opportunity as an employer, or as the conversation starter, regardless of what the conversation relationship is, you have an opportunity to listen. This is an opportunity to just stop and listen, which is something we don't do a whole lot of as human. I'm trying to remember who said it, but there's a great quote about we often listen only to respond rather than really understand a person's need.
Right.
And I think, that's a great, I like the containment part of that as a great analogy or a metaphor for just taking a moment. And because in the book you talk about how if the porcupine is going like really crazy and trying to burrow its way out underneath the fence, they'll take the can and just put it over, just to kind of say, let's take a moment. let's think about this a little bit. I don't know whether the porcupine's really thinking about it or
no, probably not. But I think the point is for most of us is that we are so passionate about what we do,
right?
And we're so good at what we do. We
Absolutely.
know what works, but others haven't had the experience. They don't know what's really what we might be able to help them with, and so it's important to give an idea, suggest an idea, but then give them the courtesy of contemplation, giving them the time to just process it and think about it and to see, oh, there might be real value in that. Right now, the idea of we will oppose it. But if I suggest the idea very casually in a conversation and I leave it alone for a day or two, or maybe a week or two, most likely they come back and say, I've been thinking about something and I think we should, and they offer my idea as if it was their own.
So you're planting an idea and
I get no credit for it. But, sometimes we just have to understand the relationships.
Right.
Some people need a little more time to embrace it, to think about it, and eventually they love it enough that they will say, hey, why don't we do this? And I've also learned that it's important to say, well, I told you that. As long as they're going in the right direction,
right?
Why do we care if we get the credit or not? Because the outcome is what we all want to share anyway.
That, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how much it annoys. Yeah, when you work in an ego-driven industry, that's usually the first thing that happens. It happens a lot. I shouldn't say the first thing that happens. That's unfair. But that happens a lot. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And it's rather than making it, look at what we did, look at what I did. Right. Quoting from your book again, just to kind of wrap up this section. I love this. It says, again, give people the courtesy of some time for contemplation. None of us like to feel caught off and just saying, oh no, that's not what I do. I do this. But if you're sharing stories, if you're sharing information with them on how this is going to benefit you, again, and giving them an opportunity to absorb all this, it will be more helpful to you. All right, so it's better to manage conversations, not the confrontations. I love that as well.
Yes.
All right, so we'll wrap this section up with the principle of the trash can is thoughtful conversations can help to achieve positive solutions. Thoughtless confrontations will leave you running in circles. I put that on my Facebook page yesterday because I think that is an awesome quote. Thoughtful conversations can help to achieve positive solutions. Thoughtless confrontations, just wanting to pick a fight, will leave you just running in circles because nobody's going to listen to you at that point. All right, so let's move on to the third principle, which has to do with the fence.
Yes.
So the fence, you were talking earlier about how